Once in a Lifetime, Chapter 7. Judith's words slammed into my ears like fists. I only lost a few elderly relatives and church family members, so I had not experienced as much grief as some of the people I knew. I couldn't imagine losing my parents or one of my siblings. I knew that when and if they departed before I did, the pain would be unbearable. The only thing I could think of to say was, I am so sorry. She grabbed the napkin off the tray, wiped her eyes, and honked into it. I'm so sorry for falling apart like this and soiling your blouse. She sniffled and dabbed the tears she left on my sleeve. I'll pay for the dry cleaning. Don't worry about it. It's not a big deal, I assured her. And this old house is hand washable. Blouse is hand washable. An awkward moment of silence passed before Judith's demeanor changed so abruptly it made my head spin. It was hard to believe that a woman who had looked so woeful a few moments ago was grinning like a cashier cat now. I'm so glad you came, she shifted in her seat and seemed to be more relaxed. Let's get better acquainted. What type of work do you do? I told her about my job and a few other things about myself. I was impressed to hear that she was a teacher. What school? I asked. I taught phys ed at a private school in San Jose up until I joined the staff at South Bay City High 5 years ago. What a coincidence. That's something else we have in common. I graduated from South Bay City High class of 2000. My last boyfriend used to teach math at a middle school in San Jose. Oh, really? Do you still communicate with him? I shook my head. We had a lot of fun and I cared about him, but we had too many obstacles to overcome. Going our separate ways was the best thing for us to do. I don't mind being on my own, though. I have a lot of interests, so I led a busy life. I have a lot of interests too, but taking care of my brother is my primary concern at the moment. Ronald is receiving dialysis treatments, but he still needs a lot of additional care. The school's been great. I've been on leave for 2 months, and they'll still pay me a portion of my salary, but that's eventually going to end, and I'll have to return to work. Thank God Ronald has amazing health care insurance. It covers the bulk of his expenses. And my husband has been in the military so many years, they pay him quite well. So long as we manage our money properly, we won't have to worry about finances for a while. I'm glad to hear that. You mentioned dialysis treatments. Isn't that for someone who has problems with their kidneys? I hope that I didn't sound dumb, but I only heard of such treatments being associated with kidneys. Before answering, Judith poured herself a cup of coffee and took a long pull, and then she leaned back in her seat and gave her the most rueful look I ever seen. 6 months after Ronald turned 30 last year, he suddenly began to get confused at the top of a hat, and then he would get so tired he could barely stand. He retained fluids, so there was some swelling in his feet, legs, and face. That quickly tapped it off so he didn't get too concerned. She exhaled and shook her head. He hates going to the doctor. But when he got so weak he couldn't even function properly, he finally made an appointment. The news was not good. His ureter had narrowed. It's a genetic defect and it causes urine to back up in the kidneys. To make a long, painful story short, that led to kidney damage. It was obvious that Judith was under a lot of stress. I could tell that she wanted to keep talking about her brother, so that I didn't attempt to change the subject. I was glad to hear that he had a good job and owned a nice house not far from her residence. Rather than let the house sit empty, He arranged for one of his friends to move in until he could return. The rent he collected covered the mortgage, so that was one less thing for them to worry about. There are days when I am so overwhelmed I don't get much sleep, she said with a yawn. I said the most appropriate thing I could think of. Well, I'll leave so you can get some rest. I set my cup on the coffee table and stood up. Judith held up her hand. No, don't go. I'm really enjoying your company. I don't get to go out much and I don't like to entertain too often. What we're going through makes a lot of folks uncomfortable. Besides, everybody I know works and they have their own lives to attend to. I sat back down. It made me feel good to know that my presence made Judith feel better. Well, then I'll stay a little while longer. What I had heard so far had made me feel somewhat gloomy, but I was able to hide it. Is anybody helping you take care of your brother? Yes, we have relatives and friends who relieve me when they can, and a nurse drops in 2 or 3 times a week. Jan, my brother's fiance, comes over several times a week. I was surprised to hear that Ronald was engaged. She helped pick out the house they plan to raise their children in. That's nice, I mumbled. Why didn't he get her to stay there instead of his friend? He tried, but she said it would be too embarrassing to be there without him. Depressing. Jan helps me out a lot, but it's so hard on her to see him hook up to that dialysis machine. Judith sighed and glanced at her watch. As a matter of fact, she should be here any minute now. She usually spends part of her weekends here. She was supposed to go to Long Beach with us. That's where Ronald and I were the past 3 weeks, where the mail mix-up occurred. We have relatives down there. Judith paused and wrung her hands some more. When she started breathing through her mouth, I thought she was going to break down again. I was glad she didn't because the way I was feeling, if she had, I would have shed a few tears myself. He wants to visit as many of them as possible while he can still travel without a lot of discomfort. And in case he doesn't get a kidney, as soon as we got the news about his condition, I immediately made arrangements to be tested. I was not a compatible match, nor were any of the relatives and friends who volunteered to be tested. Jan was too afraid to consider being a donor. Her refusal stunned a lot of folks, especially Ronald. If a man can't count his own fiancée in a life-threatening situation, Judith didn't finish her sentence. There was a grim look on her face when she spoke again. In spite of the way Jan feels, she's a wonderful and caring person, and I don't blame her for not wanting to do it. She's an only child. It's a risky surgery, and the consequences could be severe. If something were to happen to her, her parents would be crushed. That would kill Ronald and me too. She's probably not a match anyway. He's on the waiting list now. One that's quite long, I'm sorry to say. That's sad. I hope they find a kidney for him soon. I was really beginning to feel downhearted, so I knew it was in my best interest to leave in a few minutes. Thank you so much for the coffee and brownies. If you need someone to talk to, just give me a call. And you're welcome to come to my place. I stood up again and retrieved my jacket from the coat rack. I'm sorry I can't stay longer. Let's talk again soon. Judith looked so glum when I walked toward the door. I felt guilty about leaving. It was obvious she still wanted to talk. If I hadn't left when I did, there was no telling how much longer I would have sat there listening to her painful story. On my way home, I stopped at Walmart to pick up a few items. McDonald's was in the same vicinity, so when I finished shopping, I grabbed a burger. The way I was feeling now, the last thing I wanted to do was cook dinner. After I devoured my Big Mac, I called up Anna. She left a message to let me know that the Lifetime channel was going to rerun a movie later tonight I had missed a few nights ago. We chatted about a couple of things before I decided to tell her everything that had transpired since Judith dropped off my passport. I even told the part about her literally crying on my shoulder and Ronald receiving dialysis treatments. My goodness, what a day you've had. Are you going to keep in touch with this woman? Yes, I am. It might help her deal with her situation a lot easier. After my conversation with Anna ended, I took a long bubble bath and answered a dozen emails. When I returned to my living room, I noticed a message light blinking on my landline on the end table at the end of the couch. The only people who called me on my landline were telemarketers, wrong numbers, spam callers, and a few people who didn't have my cell phone number. I was surprised to see Judith's name and number on the caller ID. She left a message an hour and a half ago to let me know I left my umbrella at her apartment. I dialed her number right away. Before I could ask if it was okay for me to retrieve it tonight, she said sharply, Vanessa, I'm sorry. You can't come back tonight. I'm on my way out the door. I need to get Vonna to the hospital right away. Oh no, I wailed. Call me back when you get home. No matter how late it is, I immediately got a headache and a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. I stayed up until midnight hoping Judith would call again before I turned in for the night. When another 2 more hours went by and she hadn't called, I finally went to bed. When I got up before dawn Sunday morning, I did as much as I could to keep myself busy so I wouldn't think about the distress my new friend was experiencing. I didn't have much of an appetite, so I didn't bother to eat breakfast. I considered staying home from church. I dismissed that thought because I knew if I did, I'd pace around and stare at my telephone until I heard from Judith. Like, comment, and subscribe on this video. Bye!